everyone. Welcome to the 2021 State of Medical Device Virtual Summit. My name is Kathy Wilburn, and I'm the Director of Quality Assurance and Compliance at the R&D Group. I'm going to be your moderator for today's exciting panel discussion on strategies for improving medical device software and cybersecurity. Before we start panel introductions, I need to go over a couple things. This entire session is being recorded. It will last about 60 minutes. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session, so please submit your questions throughout the discussion. There's a box on the right-hand side under questions that you can open that and type in your question, and we'll get to as many of those as we have time for. Our goals for today's panel discussion are to provide you insight on the current state of medical device cybersecurity and the expected changes for 2021. We also hope to give you advice and resources if you're looking to implement a secure development lifecycle equipped for the new year. Today, I'm joined by 4 industry leaders and cannot wait to hear their thoughts and perspectives on the questions I've prepared, as well as the questions you in the audience have. So without further ado, let's start off with introductions of the panel. So panelists, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your company or employer, and your role there. So Chris, let's start with you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Dupont. I'm the co-founder of Galen Data. I'm an electrical engineer, but I've done software all my professional life, mostly in class 3 neurostimulators. Galen Data is a turnkey, configurable, scalable software platform that makes it easy to connect medical devices to an FDA-compliant cloud. We do it at a fraction of the cost and schedule, along with providing a host of other services. From a platform perspective, Galen takes care of all the FDA regulations, ISO standards, cybersecurity, and HIPAA. Galen is also certified to the Medical Device Quality Management Standard, ISO 1345. Thank you for that.
Great, thanks, Chris. Pooja, you're next.
All right. Hello all, I'm Pooja Karthik, and I currently work as a Senior Director at Triple Rain Technologies. We are a co-development company where we help the startups and other mid-sized to large companies bring their technologies to market. I'm currently working in the scope of their quality regulatory space and helping with the client work, as well as working on the establishing and maintaining the 13485 quality management system. So we are certified for the 13485. Additionally, I would like to say a little bit about my background. I have industry background, about 20 years in quality regulatory space, and starting from software design quality, risk management, post-market quality, and just the entire regulatory compliance.
Awesome. Thanks, Pooja. Christopher?
My name is Christopher Gates. I'm the Director of Product Security at Valentium. I joined Valentium about 4 years ago. I have 48 years of medical device development experience, mostly class 3, such as implantables and ventilators. In fact, I'm told I have more ventilator experience than anybody else. That's quite a benchmark, I guess. The last 12 of which I've been really dedicated to doing cybersecurity and helping our clients create medical devices that are secure. It's an emergent property. The engineering teams are not trained for it. So I'm helping them to train them, to bring them up to speed, to help them get a product to market. Valentium as a whole, we are a new medical device development consultancy. We can do the entire workload from beginning to end, including production, or we can drop in specific areas where in your organization you don't have coverage, such as creating test systems or mobile apps for medical devices.
Great, thanks. Okay, Shane, how about you?
Hi there. Yeah, my name is Shane Keating. So I work for ICS. So ICS does product development for embedded devices. Medical devices are a particular focus of ours. User experience is at the core of what ICS does. We have deep expertise in user interface built on Qt in particular, combined with the software engineering ability to deliver the entire platform around that. ICS has a product called Greenhouse. It greatly simplifies the journey from UX design to the finished product. It utilizes industry standard tools such as Figma to allow the customer to specify that look, the feel, the flow of what the user interacts with, and then turns that code into in embedded device software. So, it's clear that all embedded devices, including the ones that we work on, now face greater cybersecurity challenges, none more so than in the medical device area. So we enable the user to access the full functionality of the device easily, which is at the core of what we do, while also paying close attention to securing that device. My work for ICS is to deliver the cybersecurity for the embedded devices we create and turn cybersecurity into an integral part of our offering to embedded device makers, meeting the highest standards in operation in the medical devices industry. So we are able to offer regulatory expertise, technical know-how to bring those medical devices to market quickly and reliably. For myself, I've previously worked in Intel for about 13 years as engineering manager, working in hardware acceleration of cryptography, in fact. And just previous to this role, I've been working in the security area in terms of authenticating navigational signals from European navigation satellites. So that was interesting as well. So looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, great. Yeah, this is going to be a great discussion. Thanks, panelists. So according to Black Book's November 2020 State of Healthcare Industry Cybersecurity Report, cybersecurity attacks on healthcare providers are expected to triple next year in 2021. Of course, this isn't exclusive just to medical devices, but we can imagine that medical device specific attacks are trending upward. So do you think attackers are targeting medical devices with purposes other than to use them as a way into the healthcare organization's network?
Oh yeah, there are many answers to this, but unfortunately they're all yes. So, I mean, you can look at things such as competitive analysis, where your competitors are reverse engineering your products. This goes on a lot more than anybody wants to believe. All right. There is also the reusables, where you can come in and literally, this is a hundreds of millions of dollar industry in the United States of re-enabling medical devices that have been consumed and disposed of and remarketing them. Particularly pernicious because they're using your own devices to steal your market share away from you. And then, of course, we've got the OUS attacks that are going on. I mean, lately we've seen a lot of attacks against the critical infrastructure of the United States in industries such as nuclear power plants. And those are very directed and very sophisticated attacks. There's no reason to believe that we haven't experienced it on medical devices. It's just that most of our medical devices aren't sufficiently sophisticated enough from a cybersecurity standpoint to log those and report those logs back that this has been going on against us.
So what are the most, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So actually, I just wanted to add, thanks, Chris. I think that's a great point. I wanted to add the patient information is another aspect where I think they're trying to get into, because the patient information is quite a lot of money if they breach into it and steal some of that information. So I think that's probably another reason, apart from just trying to get into the network and breach the security.
Yeah, and I'd also say, things like we've seen several ransomware attacks coming down the line to healthcare organizations now. You can start to see that obviously medical devices, the correct functioning of medical devices is critical to the functioning of an organization. And if an attack can be made on those devices, that speeds up the process of payments effectively for a ransom or something like that, then that is something that attackers are going to look at as well.
And Shane, boy, I cannot agree with you more. I mean, one of the things we see here as in ransomware is the evolution of ransomware. It's a business, and to quote The Godfather, it's not personal, it's business, right? I mean, we've seen this start off as simple encrypting of your files to exfilling of your data to auctioning of your data to now call pools that do calls against the victim to say, encourage them to pay their ransom. All of this has evolved. It is a business, and the business is looking for ways to extract more money. Well, right now, all we've seen of the PCs that are embedded or part of the medical devices are being affected to this almost incidentally. I mean, we've now seen our first death out of Dusseldorf. There's a rumor that at the UHC ransomware attack, there were 4 deaths, but nothing conclusive. So we're seeing this now where there's incidental impacts because of those PCs. But this hasn't been leveraged directly against non-PC embedded medical devices yet. But where is this business going to grow? I mean, we, at least in the PC arena, have things like backups and endpoint protection and intrusion detection for our medical devices that are, ARM Cortex M3, M4 based or even lower. We don't have good protections. We don't have good ways to restore them. If I can walk into a hospital and take down all your infusion pumps or all your ventilators, no PC involved, that's a huge attack. And I think that's where they're going to evolve to here in the next 1 to 2 years, because it's such a great way to tie up a victim. They have no choice but to pay you. So as they move forward, those kind of attacks I think are really going to become much more targeted against our embedded systems.
So thinking about, speaking of those attacks, what do you think are the most often exploited vulnerabilities in our medical devices?
Well, let me jump in again here and and say we humans are lazy. So the obvious answer to that is the easiest ones to exploit. And we, as a medical device industry, have not been exactly challenging them. There have been so many mistakes made with incorporating design vulnerabilities and implementation vulnerabilities that we haven't exactly raised the bar traditionally. Yes, there are a few outstanding companies out there who are doing great work. Most of them are big ones. Philips comes to mind as a good example. Okay, but those are the rarities. Out of thousands of medical device manufacturers registered here, most are not doing that. And I know when I, as part of penetration testing, attack a system or a device, I always go to things like, do you have remote firmware updating? That's the gift that keeps on giving. It is rarely understood how to do it correctly. Most people don't even understand the 3 inherent design vulnerabilities that are in all systems for firmware updating. How do you do this? How can you attack it? That usually gives so much good information out of it. And with, of course, the ultimate goal there is to reverse engineer your intellectual property and look for other mistakes you've made, ones I can exploit on a much wider attack surface. Physical attacks, the whole idea of securing a JTAG or software debugging port is not taught, and it's a surprise to most industries, unfortunately. Side channel, power monitoring, sniffing internal buses, external flash memory from the processor, all those are great attack vectors against it, all right? And manufacturing support is left enabled. In the production line, you have to have things to test it out and make certain it performs correctly or calibrate it. Those should not be left enabled as they reach the field, all right? And then stupid things like no authentication between devices. I see people all the time do Bluetooth low energy and say, oh, well, yeah, we connected over and paired and bonded over BLE. And it's like, yeah, well, I'm the attacker and now I'm leveraging all the other mistakes you made. So we haven't been exactly raising the bar in most cases. And that's part of what my goal here is at Valentium. I recently wrote a book that's the first and only book on medical device cybersecurity. We've stood up a training program to train engineers and managers in medical device manufacturers. My goal is in the next 5 years to raise this bar up. We can't rely upon security researchers to tell us what mistakes we made on fielded products. We have to be able to do it before they reach the field.
I'm going to jump in here real quick too. And of course, everything Christopher says is right, but I think the greatest weakness is the human in the loop. We can put technical securities in, and Christopher and everybody on this panel has deep expertise. But leaving a flash drive out, or getting a flash drive with a holiday card in the mail, and then you plug it in your machine, that creates weaknesses. Phishing attacks. We all get USPS packages, and you send out a phishing attack, and 1,000 of those. And that one time when you're waiting on that package and it's late, and you get that one email that's fake, and you click on a tracking number, that's a great weakness. So yes, we have to secure the medical devices without a doubt, and everybody on this panel has deep expertise in doing that. But you cannot forget the human, the ISO standards, the procedures. HIPAA is more than about technical. So I think the greatest weakness, and everybody can chime in, please do, but it's the human in the loop. Never click on links in your emails. People that come up and competitive intelligence, they're always looking for that. And so it's just not technical, but you have to have the human operational written procedures in place to protect. It's a culture of cybersecurity too. Any other comment from the panel on that?
I agree with both. Yeah, I think it's the devices with when the medical devices originally were designed and developed, the goal was to provide the life-sustaining support, or to save lives or to make it safe, right? Nobody actually ever thought about cybersecurity and a malicious attack. And so originally they were not designed all of that in mind, and which is what I think, what I can chime in and supplement what Christopher said. And Chris, I completely agree. I think being aware of all these cybersecurity threats, and being conscious and mindful about how we operate on day-to-day basis, especially now that we're all working remotely, connecting to various networks remotely. I think that in itself introduces a lot of these vulnerability, and we can all manage that as we go forward.
And yeah, thank you for that. And also, Christopher mentioned that, that infusion pump that gets, hijacked, but also, cloud connectivity can provide redundancy. So you can do backups. If there is an intrusion or an attack, if you're doing routine backups or having algorithms, there is protection. So what also I want to leave the message is, yes, cybersecurity is very, very, serious. We need to take it very seriously, but don't let that, create fear in not connecting. I think there's greater risk in not having connected medical devices than connected. There is no equivalent of a check engine light in medical device. Your engine goes off in your car, low tire pressure, or an engine problem. And the problem is with our industry, in the medical device industry, most medical devices aren't connected, and that's starting to change. And that's why this panel is here, and that's why everybody has this expertise. But yes, there's risk in connectivity, but there's also far greater risk in living in a connected world and not having your medical devices connected. Any comment on that from the panel?
Yeah, Chris, I think that's great. And I mean, that's why Galen Data does such a great job of removing this from the amateurs in our industry and giving it to the professionals to how to configure your cloud correctly, how to set it all up so it is secure. I recently saw that's 80% of all S3 buckets are misconfigured. It's something in that range. And it's like, that's why it's tough to do. It's difficult to do. If you've ever set one up, even following AWS instructions, it's huge, it's voluminous, and easy to screw up. That's why organizations like Galen Data are so valuable, because they take that away from you and do that tough stuff and monitoring it over and over again. But Chris, I will say, you talked about that. That is possible. And over the next years, we will see more and more companies going through with being able to restore operations back to these embedded devices from cloud bases. But today, what are we talking about? Less than 1%? Something like that? Yeah, it's definitely an area where it needs to improve. We need to leverage our tools that we've got and design our systems to be that resilient and redundant.
Right, and I'll stop talking after this real quick. But let me make one point, then I'll be quiet. Somebody on the panel mentioned independence of test. So in medical device, verification engineers aren't the developers. We want that independence to test. And so this panel can help when you stand up your cybersecurity system. Don't just test it yourself. Engage Valentium or Shane or Pujo and have an independent party come in and do external pen testing. There's huge value in that independence. Sorry, Shane, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Not at all. No, I was just going to say that a huge advantage to having connected medical devices is being able to keep up with cybersecurity is essentially an arms race. Vulnerabilities are discovered all the time. The only way to combat those vulnerabilities in many cases is to do software updates. And if you can do those software updates in a connected manner, if you can make sure that everything is monitored remotely as well, then you have a huge advantage. And putting a static medical device in a lab where you can only update it using USB sticks or something like that is going to increase the vulnerability of that medical device ultimately.
Okay, so to kind of summarize this point, can you guys each give me one thing that medical device manufacturers can do to produce secure products? You've all touched on them, but let's all just maybe everyone name one.
I think now that we're all aware and actually starting to become more and more aware, let's put it that way. In my perspective, it's a life cycle management for cybersecurity management. So it's you, just like how you design for quality, design for safety, design for security, having a security program to get go with. If you're a small organization, even a person that understands what it means to make something cyber secure. There are a lot of guidances, a lot of things that are actually getting produced out there, a lot of resources that are available. And I think understanding where the vulnerabilities are, doing the security analysis, understanding the risk, and designing and developing around it and maintaining your product around it, along with your communication and post-market surveillance. I think those are some of the things that the manufacturers can be looking at and implementing it as part of their design and development processes.
Yeah, the problem with that, Pooja, and Pooja and I have worked at the same company in the past, by the way, full disclosure. So, you know, this is the case is, this is not trained. You don't have engineers who have this experience. So when you go into presentations where they say, oh, do a threat model or do an attack tree and do whiteboard these, really, you've got a bunch of people who don't begin to understand the scope or the tools and techniques of what goes into it. So my goal is I agree with everything Pooja's saying, but before you get there, you need training. You need to training. You need to send your people out, get your engineers trained in this. This is what to expect. This is how to look for it. This is how to design it in, how to create artifacts and during our development life cycle for ongoing support and regulatory submission. How do you do all that? I mean, if you come through and your project team says, here's a requirement, prevent ransomware in our medical device. Okay, well, what is an engineer supposed to do with it when he gets that? I mean, what does he need to write or not write to keep out ransomware? I mean, there are 32 different methods that ransomware uses to initially infect a system. Do you know what they all are? Okay. Did you know I was just lying to you just now about those 32? That's not the correct number. Okay. There's a lot of different infection vectors. So looking at threats doesn't work. During development, you have to look at vulnerabilities, look at how the severity of the vulnerabilities, look at how they're exploitable inside of your product and inside of your system. So training. That's the only thing that's going to work. If you're relying upon external security people to design your system, not penetration testing, not third-party, type work, but to design your system, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. You need this skill in-house, okay? I don't want to spend the rest of my career saying the same things over and over and over again to medical device manufacturers about how to design a system, how to decompose it, how to score these vulnerabilities, how to mitigate those vulnerabilities. I want your inside team to do that. Just like you have quality experts, just like you have human factors experts, you have software quality experts. This needs to be a subdivision inside of your organization to stand up and do this.
Yeah, I would actually go along with that completely, and also kind of add one more thing to it is culture. Changing the culture within an organization. We often say that that culture eats strategy for breakfast. The culture within an organization has to be that it's not just about creating a great product. It is about creating a great product, but it's also about creating a secure product. And that often. You often, when you're talking to engineers in the initial stages of development of a product, it is often the case that we got to make this product better and bigger and faster, and we got to get it to the market as quickly as possible. But there also has to be that understanding that that the culture has to change. That the budget allocation has to be there up front to address these vulnerabilities, to actually do this properly, because. Coming from Intel, we obviously had a reasonably large disclosed vulnerability that came out in our silicon. And, at that stage, a new division more or less was created. At that stage, it's almost too late. You should be thinking about that up front to make sure that it's built in at the start. And, echo what Christopher says, the attention to detail and trying to understand where those vulnerabilities are is critical.
Yep. And I mean, the first time I worked with a medical device manufacturer and was training their engineering staff, after doing this and pounding that into them and demonstrating all this, I was in a design meeting, design review, and one of the lead software engineers, somebody says, well, we're going to add these 3 features. And I looked over and says, okay, but what vulnerabilities are those going to create? Literally, I was in tears. It's like, yes, that's the way to think of it. Yes, exactly right. What am I introducing that I don't realize I'm introducing by creating these extra features in this product? And then that's exactly right. Changing the culture, Shane, totally spot on.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
No, I think
Yeah.
they've covered the subject world. One, you know, in quality, we have a saying: you can't inspect quality in, you have to design it in. Same with cybersecurity. You can't think about it after the fact. I think Christopher, you know, and Shane, you build it in, and when you make changes, you do a risk analysis. Where are my weaknesses? Where are my vulnerabilities? So you start from day one. You plan for it, and especially living in a connected world, it's not a choice anymore. You have to design it in from day one of the project.
Absolutely, and don't rely upon field updates to get you out of that scenario. But part of the process I preach is during development, there are two different types of vulnerabilities: design vulnerabilities and implementation vulnerabilities. You can patch implementation vulnerabilities. I didn't check the length of that buffer. I'm using insecure intrinsic values in my code, and blah, 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 blah. But all of a sudden it's like, oh, I didn't encrypt that PHI and I don't have any hardware crypto, and I've got to update this every 10 milliseconds. I don't have time, program space, RAM space to do this in software. I need hardware acceleration, and my processor doesn't have that. That's not a field update. That's a whole spin of your product line. So you really have to think about that. Don't think, oh, this will get me out of all trouble having field updates. It won't. It just gets you out of certain problems.
Yeah. So we see that, you know, there's more awareness now in our industry, and you guys are, you know, all saying that, yes, we need to bring even more awareness, you know, to our companies and organizations, and, you know, to our people and training, and, you know, and Christopher, I know how that moment feels when somebody finally gets something that you've been hounding on, you know, that always feels great. So, you know, with this, regulatory bodies, standards organizations, you know, they're recognizing that we need regulations, laws, guidance, you know, on how to do this. And right now, what we have is we have a lot of different, you know, regulations, guidance from different countries, different organizations. They're not globally harmonized. So what do you think it takes for that to change, to get us to where, you know, we have these harmonized regulations, standards, and do you know of any efforts that are underway to do that right now?
Well, I always leverage my friend Michelle Jump of MedSec. She's by far the most outstanding expert in all US and OUS standards for medical devices out there. And it's sad is what the answer is. I mean, yes, we're seeing some changes in 60601, 62304, even 14971. It's implied, even though they don't use the word security. There are some 18 different OUS guidance documents for medical devices. Brazil just released theirs. In fact, I just got it translated into English. It was in Portuguese. I don't do Portuguese. So there are some good standards. I mean, things like UL 2900, AMI, TIR 57 and 97. Those are really good standards to follow, and you can kind of riff off of those, but they give you good guidelines. There is one effort to standardize it, and that's the Imdrf that was released. And I'm glad somebody's trying to standardize and harmonize this. Unfortunately, it's a horrible vehicle. It was extremely poorly written. They cut and pasted from a lot of different standards. Even the terminology inside the Imdrf principles and practices document isn't consistent. And so it's very confusing what you're talking about. I wish they had done a better job of that document, because we are solely in need of a way to do this. I mean, these standards all run the scope from being very ethereal, addressing policies and procedures, to technical details about how you're going to implement cryptography and authentication. So there needs to be a harmonization to go on, because right now there isn't one.
So thank you, Christopher. I'd like to add on that, the nature of regulation and the standardization given various countries, it's always a challenging space, not just from security standpoint. I think in general, every time we are looking at different markets, there are different regulations. So for example, European Union has now EU MDR versus FDA quality system regulation. So they come in with their own natural way of, okay, this is the country, these are the regulations, these are the standards that kind of get recognized versus adopted, depending on where you are. I think with the security while I think there are multiple different standards, guidances, common specification for EU MDR that has just come out, there is a common theme, and I think the theme is managing through your pre-market and post-market risk management processes, right? And combining it and making sure that you address the risk. I think that it doesn't matter how many different guidances and standards there are, understanding the inherent concept of how do we mitigate the security vulnerabilities and or threats, and how do we process that through the security program, right? And understanding the safety around that security, understanding, and that safety can be related to your business. It can be related to patients. So I think understanding the core concept around it, I think each one of these, if I look at TIR 57, if I look at FDA guidances, if I look at Imdrf, if I look at the common specification, all of it is built kind of revolving around the concepts from ISO 14971, which is risk management. So I think there's something there that while we're waiting to get everything harmonized, and yes, it's a slow process, I think the industry can benefit a lot from looking at the commonalities and taking, and I think the most important aspect is having a risk-based approach, right, on how you manage your security program. That's what I would like to actually say. But yes, I agree that it's a very slow and evolving process, but we have a lot more than what we had 10 years ago. So I think I'm very happy about that. Yes.
Totally agree. And by the way, for everybody out there, get involved. Don't just wait for somebody to dictate to you what these standards look like. These have working groups behind them. Lord knows I'm in way too many of the working groups right now, okay? It actually impacts my real work. But get involved. Make these things workable. Make these things so that they add value, but they don't burden you with too much. Some of the stuff that's going on right now, like the software bill of materials work out of NTIA, this is being adopted in the next guidance document out of the FDA. Things like even other industries, such as nuclear power generation. Senator King, I know, is pushing NERC to have software bill of materials, but we're going to have them as far as medical devices, both machine readable and human readable. These are some of the things that are out there. Also privacy and how that moves. Inside the United States, all these different states have implemented different privacy laws. And again, no harmonization. That's inside of our own country. Attempts to normalize that have not gone anywhere. Senator Mark Warner has tried to introduce a lot of legislation. Get involved with this, see how this works out, try to influence it in positive ways, make this work for our industry. And by the way, Pooja, I was sitting there thinking, yes, if you throw all 18 of these guidances that are around the world up on the wall, stand way back and defocus your eyes, there's about 5 different pillars that are there, such as secure design lifecycle, cybersecurity risk management, Amy TIR 57, ongoing communications with the end users as far as events and what issues and whether or not you're impacted, post-market vulnerability monitoring and management of those risks, post-market incident response, and that's again with your customers and making certain you address them and help them in instances. Those are 5 pillars that kind of sort of weave through all of these, but it's a lot nicer to have those specifically called out and harmonized.
Agree. And I think I'd like to add, FDA is doing some great effort right now. They have established a center of excellence to realize, they need to bring more awareness in general public. It's no longer just manufacturers' responsibility to take all of the precautions, right? What should the general public and customer and patients that they need to be doing as well to stay aware, become aware? They're also taking initiatives sometimes, sending the safety notifications to the general public. So if you go to their website and type in cybersecurity on FDA website, it'll straight take you to the cybersecurity center of, actually digital health center of excellence, where you can see multiple things like software as a medical device, and cybersecurity is part of all of that. I think if the folks that you really want to learn a little bit more about, visiting the FDA site can also give you a lot of information, because just October was the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So there is a whole lot of material out there that can be tapped into.
Totally agree. And big shout out to Dr. Suzanne Schwartz and Jessica Wilkerson of the FDA. They are by far, of any industry, of any agency, doing more for cybersecurity than anybody else. I mean, it is just striking. And so their knowledge of it and the way they're implementing it in a way that is not pedantic, they're not shutting people down, but they are definitely a force to be considered as you're developing and going forward. Yeah, I think totally agree with you, Pooja. Great job on the FDA's part.
So do you think the FDA are we in the US doing the best job getting all those requirements and things defined, or are there other countries that you feel like, wow, they're really hitting it?
I think all of these countries that Christopher mentioned have specific requirements around even submission, right? So that does mean I think every country is putting in some level of effort. EU has a common specification that came out with the new EU MDR, and they put it out there, right? So I think there's efforts going on. But I think being in the United States, of course, I monitor FDA much more closely. And so I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, and I would say the FDA is leading, but the others are not that far behind. I mean, Canada, Australia, some of those guidances are outstanding. And we have clients all over the world, so I have to address all these different standards. If you're in Australia, you have to align to the Australian goals, or if you're in Canada, you have to do that, and the FDA. So, because everybody wants to market the United States. So yeah, I think the FDA is doing a great job. They're the ones at the head of the team pushing everything forward, but the rest aren't doing that bad either.
Good. So if I wanted to update my current processes to, incorporate cybersecurity throughout the development lifecycle, how do I get started with this? What do I do?
Well,
That's
sorry, Pooja. The first thing you got to do is get your senior management on board. This security starts at the top and goes down. Here, by the way, just yesterday we saw a CISA report of yet again more hard-coded credentials and issues in GE imaging systems. 2018 saw that as well too, a whole raft of their products. Now this is over 100 different products. Clearly, there is not a motivation coming from the senior leadership team or the board of directors to incorporate security into the development lifecycle. They have an ongoing systemic problem. When you see those type of repeat offenders doing this, you know that management hasn't bought into it. So that it starts there. And so you need to train. I keep going back to training, but you need to train your staff, and that means you have to have motivations to do it, and that starts at the top of your organization.
And just to back that up, it's culture. And so, during an ISO audit, the auditor can very quickly determine if management is involved in the quality assurance management system. It's one question, you can figure that out. So, the fish rots from the head down. And so at the top level, you start with the culture. And again, it's just not technical. It's your procedures, it's your standards, from design controls to 1345 to 62304. That all sets your culture. And so if top management is supports and rewards, cybersecurity culture, it's certainly a step in the right direction. And one other comment is, and we've all touched on it, it's not a country problem. Cybersecurity is a global issue. And so it's just not the FDA or GDPR. You have to be knowledgeable as much as you can of all the standards. So when you deploy, servers, outside the United States, sometimes you have to put servers in country. And so you have to understand that. If somebody outside the United States is traveling to the United States and they access their patient portal, you might have to comply with those regulations, not per the United States, but for where the country that person traveled from. So it truly is a global challenge, and a great opportunity for engineers and managers to solve. But to answer your question, Kathy, it's culture. You set the culture at the top, and hopefully it flows down to everybody. It's not just an engineering problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, just to add, you know, the laws and regulations that we have, they're there to create a successful industry, and the industry's success depends on, you know, a good track record in the cybersecurity area. If there are highly publicized escapes, it affects the reputation of the industry in general. And I think, you know, those laws and regulations that are put in place should really emphasize that the cost of not getting this right is greater than, you know, the cost of getting it right. You've got to get it right, basically. And you know, one area I just looking at some of the standards I've seen, I think there could be a little bit, the way that regulations should develop, there could be a little bit more focus on what happens when a vulnerability is found and what happens when a product recall happens. And, you know, there is very closely specified things about what happens before a product is initially shipped. But if a vulnerability is found in that product, it's not so closely specified exactly what should happen, what order, that kind of thing. I mean, one thing that occurred to me was that in general, it would be better to specify that more closely so that consumers can have a lot of confidence that any kind of problem that's found out there will be dealt with in the right way.
By the way, one of the things we've been hyping on here is regulation and standards and guidances, both US and OUS. And everybody thinks that's the high bar. It's not. That's the low bar. Okay.
Right.
That is not the high bar. You want to see what the high bar is? It's your customer expectations. Health delivery organizations, HDOs, in their contract language has been going higher and higher and higher. You want to see something as an MDM who's been ignoring security that will scare you to death? Look at some of this verbiage they're now including in their contracts for medical devices. Fortunately, Greg Garcia, the Health Sector Coordinating Council, they actually have a working group here that next quarter they're going to release standard security languages for contracts. But this is amazing stuff. I mean, there are things like you're being liable for any event. Maybe your pole mount infusion pump is a pivot point into a network. Doesn't affect the operation of your infusion pump, but you infect other systems and hundreds of millions of dollars are impacted. Guess what? You're liable for it. So all of this contract language that's going forward, that's really progressive and uneven at the moment. Okay, Mayo certainly led the charge in this with their default. By the way, you can all go out to the Mayo site and download it and take a look at it if anybody's curious. But they led this, as they do with so many things in security, all this language, but it's now being standardized. So those are going to be the high bar for you folks, not the regulatory side of things.
Yeah, that's a good point, Christopher. So what are some positive trends that you guys have seen related to cybersecurity that will carry into 2021?
I think I mean, this conference is one, awareness, what everybody on this panel is doing, working towards, you know, global standards. We'll see more and more of that. Right now, that it's connectivity for medical devices. It's an emerging market. It really didn't exist a few years ago, except for some very isolated situations. But, you know, with COVID and everything else, I think that will accelerate the need for connected medical devices and the need for, you know, deeper cybersecurity and standards. And again, Christopher, what he said about the standards are just a low bar, that is absolutely correct. And so we have to put so much more in, you know, from engineering and requirements and design and risk analysis to ensure that, you know, we do our very best to minimize any type of, you know, breach or escape. But I think, you know, the book that Valentium put out, I think Christopher is one of the authors. That is a step in the right direction on communicating and training on the need. There you go. and we didn't plan this out.
Product placement, Chris.
There you go. That was just by chance. But those are some of the things. So it just takes time. It's a new frontier. But we are, you know, and thank you to Greenlight and thank you to Kathy for hosting this panel and the folks on this panel. You know, industry is responsible for improving, you know, our world and specifically cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I hope to see happen in 2021 with the change in government is a little more direct mandate from Congress to the FDA to enforce security in medical devices. Right now, They are operating in the auspices of safety, which certainly it is a safety impact, but there's more to that, to cybersecurity. And I'd like to see them given a little more direct mandate for security. And that could very well happen. I mean, by the way, if you didn't see Jessica Wilkerson's, the FDA's great video during Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, you should. It's an hour-long video, well worth watching. Level set your expectations. She did a great job on it. But she talks about the fact that they are working under that safety moniker. And it should be a little broader than just safety. There's a lot of aspects to this, like the aforementioned using your device to pivot into a network. Didn't affect the safety of your infusion pump, but who knows what it did for the greater network. Also, I see positive signs in, like I mentioned earlier here, software bill of materials, the SBOM. The NTIA working group headed up by the great Alan Friedman. He's that most overworked guy in government. He's doing a great job of defining this. The first product efforts, and we're now going into 2.5 years of working groups on this. The first deliverable out of it is what is being adopted by the FDA for how you do machine readable software bill of materials, how you share them, how you structure them, or what formats they're being used. We're taking it even farther because SBOMs could indicate false positives. It says, oh, look, here's a ventilator, and this ventilator has all these third-party software components in it. Oh, it has OpenSSL 1.1.f, the one vulnerable to heartbleed. But you're not even using it for certifications. You're using it for certificates, rather. You're using it to generate random numbers or something. Maybe that code isn't even in there. You've compiled it down to specific code. So how do you give specific awareness to the end user to allow them to assess the risk? How do I tell Tim Walsh at Mayo, yeah, you have a problem here for real, you should take these offline? Or how do I come through and say, no, don't worry, just because I included that, it can't be exploited in how we used it. We are even addressing that, and we've got a great method of doing that so the MDMs can express this in real time to the HDOs so they can make the assumption of how much risk they want to buy off on. So that's what I see happening.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, not to drop. I would say just a general trend as well as there's a increased focus on and increased investment in medical devices in general because of what's happening right now. And I think that's an opportunity to upgrade the cybersecurity in a lot of platforms because we're talking about new generations of medical devices. We're talking about getting things done faster. The consumer need and the consumer expectations are definitely there now. And there's some older medical device platforms that just can't be made as secure as newer ones. And this kind of this current situation of upgrading a lot of medical device platforms, I think, is going to be positive in terms of helping to secure the industry.
Yeah, great. So guys, we have lots of questions to answer. So let's move on to our Q&A. Thanks, audience, for your questions. So let's see. Okay, so for embedded medical devices, how do we start approaching the topic of cybersecurity? I think we touched a little bit on that, but if you want to add something specific for embedded, that'd be great.
Should I say read my book, take my training? Seriously, it's not a bad approach. In fact, even in the training, part of what we have, the 3-tiered structure, and in one of the tiers we talk about how do you educate your senior leadership in this. They may not be aware of it. They may be aware of it and not sleeping, but don't know how to address it. How do you go to them and engage them and get them involved? This starts, as Chris and I have both repeated here, this starts at the top. And don't let that fish rot. So you start to build that culture, but first it has to be mandated that culture has to be built. So it's not easy. You have to know how to speak to them. If you go in and say, oh, we have buffer overflow attacks, yeah,
right,
they're going to be, no. You speak to them in terms of impacts, potential risks, potential timeline issues, the costs associated with that. Speak to them in their language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, looking at an embedded medical device, you need to look at the safety of the person, first and foremost, the safety of the data contained on that, safety of the personal information, how are we going to protect that, and the safety of access to that device as well, the safety of who can command that medical device. if you start to look under those three headings, the safety aspect, and start to think about, well, what could go wrong and what are the potential attack vectors, then then the rest of the technical requirements will probably come out of that. But the safety of the person, the safety of the data, and the safety of access would be the three key things for me to start with.
And let me add to Shane's comments, which is, unlike quality folks who are focused on safety and efficacy, security folks, we have a bigger picture. We're looking at your business model. Killing patients is bad for business. So we also address safety and efficacy, but so is losing intellectual property that took you years to develop. So is losing a consumable market, somebody cloning your device, somebody re-enabling your device. Okay, these are all bad for your business model. So not only safety and efficacy issues do we highlight, but also the business impacts. Care to take a guess which resonates more with your senior leadership, by the way? They want to know if they're going to lose millions of dollars. So.
Right, and when you're embedded devices can be anything. So when you're looking at it, we all have limited resources. So you have to take a risk-based approach to where your weaknesses are, such as an LVAD or a heart pump has greater risk than a surface temperature embedded device. And so apply, when you have limited resources, from a program management point of view, try to determine the greatest risk and focus on the high risk areas first, and then move out. As Chris was saying, is that, life-sustaining devices, you have to focus on where those weaknesses are. But if it's an external, surface temperature device, it's more about securing the data and less about if there's a attack that makes it a malfunction that could actually harm the patient. So whenever you can, always take a risk-based approach to your cybersecurity.
Yeah, Christopher, you mentioned earlier that that most people don't know the three main areas of vulnerability. Someone wants you to share what those three main areas are.
For firmware updating. Okay, for firmware updating, or what's called firmware, FOTA, firmware over the air. FOTA has three inherent design vulnerabilities. The first one is information exposure. In other words, you didn't encrypt your payload. You just stuck your bin file, your object file, your hex file, whatever it was, and pumped that across. People like me are going to intercept that. 2 minutes later, we're going to have high quality C code in front of us. We're going to see what other design mistakes you made and maybe exploit those. Maybe we'll pull out intellectual property that's in their algorithms that you spent years doing. So that's the first one, is exposure. Okay, the second one's integrity checking. And it's more than a CRC, a cyclic redundancy check. What you want to do is use something cryptographically strong, such as a SHA or HMAC cryptographic hashing methodology. And that ensures the integrity of this. So while in transit, whatever that transit is, okay, extra code isn't appended into it to give me higher level of privileges, or maybe I disabled authentication on it. So modified it in flight, in transit. So that's the second one. And the third one is one very popular in home routers, which is rollback attacks. You've done your encryption, you've done your integrity checks, and you're doing that great, but there's a known vulnerability in version 3 of it. You're currently in version 10 of this, and I supply version 3 package to your device, and it goes, hey, perfectly formatted, perfectly encrypted, everything's good. And then but it has a known vulnerability that I'm then going to exploit into it. So those are the 3 inherent design vulnerabilities in every FOTA system. By the way, there's a whole bunch of non-security related issues, more than I can go over. It's more than an hour discussion. So if you want, feel free to email me and we can go over all the practical aspects of implementing FOTA. It's a lot more challenging than I'm erasing a sector of flash and reprogramming, a lot more.
Somebody wants to see your book again. flash that up there for us again.
It was #1 on Amazon engineering books for the longest time, and so
Nice.
medical device cybersecurity for engineers and manufacturers. Isn't that crazy that this is the first book? When our tech house came to us to do this, they said, "Can you research what the competition is?" And we went, "Good Lord, there is no competition."
Yeah. That's always a good thing. First to market, right? Okay, yeah. Kendra has a question for us. In your experience, hospitals have been unable or unwilling to update their systems to work with devices that have state-of-the-art cybersecurity controls, etc. So what have you as panelists seen, or what insight can you provide about how a medical device manufacturer can balance improving security with being able to market the product?
We're seeing a trend that obviously integrating with the hospital infrastructure IT is incredibly difficult. The bureaucracy. We work with a lot of devices outside the hospital, so we're starting to see a trend where people are designing in their own cell communication, their own hotspots. It might be a device that operates in the hospital, but they'll have their own capability as the embedded, technology increases in horsepower and storage. The cell technology will be built directly into those heart pumps, directly into those surface temperatures, so that they'll be able to bypass the hospital security infrastructure and go direct. And that is good because, one, it offloads the hospital infrastructure. Two, manufacturers have much more control over everything this panel is talking about today related to cybersecurity.
Okay, so when we're, this is our next question. For those types of cybersecurity risks that aren't related to patient user harm, we talked about that earlier, that, that's the main focus, but there's so much more, to it. So how do you perform a risk analysis on those items? What do you consider them risks, even though they don't affect patient or user safety?
I have a real problem with the term risk. Risk, 14971 is a very specific definition. Okay, there are business risks, there are patient risks, there are provider risks, there's all sorts of secondary risks. So I try to avoid that, and instead you formally decompose your design, allowing a structured algorithm to expose all the potential vulnerabilities, and then you score using a scoring rubric the list for your use cases. So let's say you've got an automatic external defibrillator, an AED, and it's broadcasting out over Bluetooth Low Energy the battery status. Does anybody care about confidentiality, integrity, or availability of that? Nope, you do not. Okay, but all of a sudden I use that same BLE interface in my use case to be able to adjust the amount of energy that's going to be delivered on the next therapy session. Worse, I can trigger that shock to be delivered, okay, over BLE. All right, all of a sudden there, I now have to leverage a whole bunch more controls. So it gets very, very user specific in how you're going to address those risks. I hate to call it that. It's issues and vulnerabilities that you have to look at. And those are all over severity and exploitability. The only two metrics that mean anything. No likelihood, by the way. Notice that? No likelihood. Where malicious intent is involved, there is no likelihood.
Yeah, so I think one way to look at this is you have FMEA, which is the design, failure modes and effects analysis, and you have patient safety risk analysis. There are two aspects. One, you're trying to achieve design reliability as well as design safety. Not necessarily everything that is a potential failure mode in the design can introduce a patient safety risk. And I'm trying to relate and give a parallel example. And so in this case, when you do the FMEA, you're looking at, again, you're doing the RPN, which is what Christopher just said, scoring, right? But there are only some potential failure modes that could technically go to patient safety risk, right? That could actually transpire into potentially causing harm to the patient. So similarly, in security world, it's the same way. You have vulnerabilities and you have threats, but not all of them would transpire into actually causing patient safety. So identifying, having a security analysis and identifying those that actually potentially can contribute to patient safety risk can then be transferred over to your patient safety risk analysis with analysis on the actual assessment of harm, right? As to how does it do it? So what are those sequence of events? And then what mitigations that need to be put in place? Anything that does not stays at the design level, right? And you understand what you need to do to prevent that business risk, prevent any other technical risk or design risk, but not necessarily patient. But anything that does transpire, it should go into your final patient safety risk assessment itself.
Right, and let me clarify one thing here. Your staff engineers, your security experts, we flag these as potential safety and efficacy impacts. That means it gets introduced into your risk management system. Those are the folks who really make that judgment call. I mean, I have a denial of service that holds off your essential performance for 10 minutes. Maybe that means nothing in an insulin infusion pump, but in a ventilator, you're not going to be breathing after that. So let the experts in each of the disciplines make that decision, introduce it into the risk management system, and they're the clinicians and experts in that group make that decision. We just flag it.
Okay, guys, we are out of time. I thank you so much, panelists, for your expertise and this awesome discussion. And audience, thanks for joining in. And sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but appreciate everyone's time.
If there's any other questions for me, feel free to email me.
I will.
I'll answer the questions.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.